This morning's scripture lesson comes from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
One of the consistent themes of Jesus' ministry is service. At one point, he would say, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." In fact, service is a consistent theme throughout the New Testament. Paul made it clear to everyone that everyone is called to serve in some way or another. All of us are called. Now, it may seem odd that this passage turns to the subject of service in a way, because it's one of those passages that is rather fascinating. For the second time, Jesus is telling his disciples about his death and resurrection. Remember, the first time was when Peter declared him the Christ, and he began immediately to talk about what must happen, what must come. Now here he goes for a second time. Then they make their way to Capernaum. And as they're going that way, it seems that the disciples are having a robust conversation about who will be the greatest, who will sit at the right hand in glory with Jesus. Truth is, they were arguing, weren't they? They were really arguing. I can imagine what some of them might have said. Peter might have spoke up and said, "Hey, wait a minute here. I was the first to call him Messiah. Don't you think he would want me at his right hand?" Or John might speak up, and John might say, "But what about me? I'm the one he loves." Read John's gospel and you'll know exactly what I mean. Or then there's Levi. Levi, that's a good one there. Remember him? He was a tax collector, and he might say, "Hey, wait a minute, folks, look at me. I'm the most dramatically changed of all of you. I was a tax collector, and no one likes tax collectors, right? And now I'm a beloved child of God." I don't know what they said to each other, but I do know that they missed the point. Each of these disciples, as they argued, missed the point. I can't tell you what they really said, but Jesus, picking up on this argument, will ask them point blank, "What are you arguing about?" And then Jesus quickly turns the conversation to service. Just that quick. Now, I'm not certain over the years how many sermons you've heard on service. You've probably heard lots of them, right? In some way or another, the whole notion of service has been woven into that sermon. So the challenge to me is, how do I give a fresh spin on an age-old calling? What do I say different from anyone else? Just as each of us have different gifts, and therefore will serve God in different ways, using our talents, our skills, our abilities, all these things, isn't it possible that there is a common denominator among all who serve? Isn't it possible that there is something there that allows us to fully understand what this whole idea of service is all about? One of the things that comes to my mind when I think of some common thread is that true servants of God are generous with their resources, with their time, their talent, all of these things. True servants of God are generous. Now, generosity doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone. It just doesn't. And what I've discovered is that when we have a heart of generosity, it points to something deeper, and that is that if we really love God with all of our heart, if we really can say that God is Lord of our lives, we are going to be a generous people. Because we find that in our generosity, we heap up blessing upon blessing. And God just keeps on giving and never letting us down. Now, let me tell you something. You don't have to be rich to be generous. There are so many ways in which we can give. Several years ago, when we built the new church at Winfield, we left the upstairs area just a shell. We couldn't afford to do all the work and hire a contractor to do everything, though that might have been quicker. But we had two guys in that church that could do anything, Tucker and Lee. Those guys inspired us to say, you know what, we can finish out that space ourselves. We don't need to pay an extra $50,000 or whatever it was just to get the job done. And so we began working on that project. I tell you, there's a piece of sheetrock over there. If we could just take it down for a moment, I could show you the very nail that I drove. It was perfect. It didn't bend. It just went right in. But we had a gentleman in the church that came to me once and said, you know, I don't have money to give to this project. I wish I did, but he said, I can paint. And if you could use a painter, I'll be there for you. And when we got to the point of painting those classrooms upstairs, that guy was there every single evening until the work was done. And boy, could he paint. It was tremendous. What a way to serve. What a way to give of his time and his talent, his skill, his ability. You see, generosity comes in lots of different forms. But when God comes first, we become generous. When God comes first, we want to give of ourselves, and God will bless us again and again. Secondly, I want to lift up the fact that servants are hospitable. Servants True servants are hospitable. Hospitality has always been one of those marks of a true servant. When we offer a welcoming spirit in this church, when we say to someone who walks in for the first time, "We are glad you are here. Let me walk you to your seat. Let me sit with you. Let me show you where the facilities are." It's those little things that go a long way in showing our hospitality. And what's even more important is that we be willing to show people that we mean it. We really want you here. We really want you here. Hospitality can come in many different forms. And when we invite someone to be a part of our fellowship, a part of our church, we're practicing hospitality. And let me remind you that inviting others to come and be a part of who we are doesn't have to be difficult or complicated. Look at the example of Jesus. When he began calling his first disciples, what did he say? "Follow me." That was it. He didn't give them a discourse. He didn't do anything like that. He just simply said, "Follow me." In John, he says, "Come and see." Can you imagine what it would be like if every one of us in this room could say to someone this week, "Come and see what God is doing at St. Andrew"? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Come and see. See it for yourself. But the invitation is not the end. When people come, we need to make them feel welcome. We need to make them feel wanted, and we need to make them feel appreciated. Hospitable people will go the second mile. They'll make sure that that person, even the stranger, is welcome in this place. See, it's easy sometimes to say, "Oh, we're a friendly church." Yeah, we all know each other and we love each other and we greet one another each week and all that. But it's another thing to say, "We're really a friendly church." We not only welcome each other, we're glad when someone comes our way. And we want them to feel right at home here. And one other thing that has to be a part of this equation. True servants introduce others to Jesus. Did you hear that? True servants introduce others to Jesus. We can do that in lots of ways. It may be simply by you telling your story. What God is doing in your life. That may be enough. It may come in the form of someone coming up to you and asking you one of those faith questions. Tell me about this, or help me understand what's going on here. Isn't it fascinating how God works? On Wednesday morning, I took my old Jeep to the garage to get new spark plugs, 16 of them. Isn't that exciting? Now, you would think in a setting like that, you wouldn't ever possibly have an opportunity to minister to someone. The owner of that establishment, I know peripherally. I've met him, I've talked to him, small talk, that sort of thing. And that morning as I was sitting there, that first hour or so, business was kind of slow. And so Mike just came over. I was sitting on a bench outside of the garage just waiting, and he came over and sat down beside me. Next thing you know, he's telling me his life story. A life filled with tragedy. Telling me how he witnessed his niece committing suicide just 4 or 5 feet from him. Telling me how his wife couldn't bear what had happened. She too was in the room. And how just a couple of months later she died of a heart attack. Died of grief. Died of suffering. Mike didn't even know I was a preacher at that point. I'd never told him. He just opened up. And finally, after a while, I just looked at him and I said, Mike, I had no idea that all this had gone on in your life, and I want you to know that I will be praying for you. Praying that somehow God will give you peace. Praying that somehow God will heal your heart. Praying that somehow you'll be surrounded by love. And he looked at me and he said, what kind of line of work are you in? It wasn't until then that he knew I was a pastor. He lives over in Ohio, and I said, boy, if it wasn't such a long trip, I'd invite you to St. Andrew United Methodist Church, where I guarantee you, you will be loved. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I've been trying to go to church. He said, I just may take you up on that sometime. So if some tall guy comes in here one day with a ponytail down his back, you'll know it's Mike, and you say, Mike, I'm glad you're here. He'll be surprised. You see, God gives us opportunities, sometimes in the least expected places. We just need to be ready to respond. Because it may be that you plant a seed that will change a life forever. I pray every day that when my time on this earth is over, that I will have had many opportunities to introduce others to Jesus. True servants introduce others to Jesus. And you know what? When God is Lord of our lives, we're going to be more generous, aren't we? When God is Lord of our lives, we're going to be hospitable and mean it. When God is Lord of our lives, we will want to introduce others to Jesus. And so this day, as we sing this final hymn, I want to invite you to come. Maybe you've been sitting there thinking, you know what? I could be more generous with my resources, my time, my talent, all these things. Or maybe you're sitting there thinking, you know what? I could get up out of my seat and walk across the room and greet someone who enters that I don't know. I could do that. Or maybe you're sitting there thinking, you know, it's been a while since I introduced anyone to Jesus. Lord, Help me to be open to that opportunity in whatever form it comes. So as we sing this closing hymn, I invite you to come and pray. And let's allow God to do something very special in our lives this day as we become true servants of the living God. Let us pray.